Finally, holy crap. All right. So today I'm having an interview. It's going to be the first part of a several part series. I'm going to be interviewing my friends, getting to know them a little bit better. Um, Hopefully, going to understand some different perspectives. I have much prior experience with you already. I
Yeah.
mean, weeks of prior engagement. I won't tell you my motive for the most part or anyone for having these interviews because I don't want you to be influenced in your responses by me telling you.
hmm
And I'll also try and do my best not to. Again, we have prior history, and I don't want to necessarily have conversation revolved around that prior experience. We'll see how that goes. Obviously, it's going to inevitably happen. Um,
I mean, yeah, we've had hours of conversations with one another where I consider us friends. So,
Absolutely, yeah,
and I already
and
know a lot about your life, and you know a lot about my life. So,
yep. I friend is a word where it has many different meanings amongst people. Um, that's something that I want to talk about is meaning in language.
okay,
But yes, I mean everyone that I'm going to have an interview with, I consider a friend, of course. So we could start there. I have no pre-planned questions, by the way.
okay,
Didn't do any homework is another way of me saying that.
that's my
Uh,
favorite. My favorite type of interviews.
right, right. So let's start with language.
Language.
I notice uh, an issue. There's many issues in philosophy. One of them is linguistic. Kind of gets on the meta level of certain questions. It's a problem of problem seeking, right? What's the problem? What's the meta problem in this case, as someone like David Chalmers would say? Such a word like friend has many different meanings to it. Let's do a better one. Let's do the word set.
Okay,
The word set, I believe, has the most different meanings in
really.
in any English word. Yes, you could set a set of rocks on top of this table set. Um, and do you
You could
notice
set in a volleyball, set
a
someone up.
set? Exactly. Nature is another word like this. What's the nature of this? We're out in nature, natural kind of stuff like that. Do you notice a problem the way that I kind of see this meta problem where many different meanings are often conflated and talked past each other?
Yes, I remember when I was younger, at least the beginning of college, I kind of language. My goal was to make language attempt to make language like scientific language, where one thing means that one thing, and there's no other way around it. Like H2O. Instead of calling things water, we call it H2O, two hydrogen, one oxygen. Um, but what I found, and I thought that would be like a solution, just have words that mean one thing, and we'll all have these distinct, and therefore the problem will be solved. Everyone's going to be able to agree on something. We're not going to have this annoying language issues that we just talked about, people having different nuances to different words,
Ambiguous.
ambiguous. But I think then, because I did study psychology, I started seeing the various experiences that a person brings along with the words they use. And it's like my idea of a tree and your idea of a tree. Even if we say, "Oh, what's a tree?" Well, it's a plant. We kind of have this scientific or analytical definition of a tree. But then there are the nuances between how you see a tree and I see a tree. What if I'm someone who works with trees? I know so much more about the tree. The tree itself has so much more meaning to me, and I think about it differently, and I see it differently than the way you see a tree. So words themselves come with so much baggage, and then on top of that, speaking two different languages, there's some words that just yeah, you can translate them from Hebrew into English, but then
Mm,
within the context of a sentence, they don't mean the same thing or have the same like cultural significance or emotional connection to them. Or then you have like turn of phrase, different phrases that people use in different languages that have a specific connotation. Like in Hebrew, for example, you say, this person's peeing against the wind. For you, that mean you don't even know what that means, right? And then from that, there was developed the word of, oh, this person is shiny, right? So if I say you're shiny, you're someone who's peeing against the wind. That means
okay.
you're full of it. You think you're hot shit, but really you're just peeing against the wind. You're shiny. You're
Okay.
full of your own. Right? It's like these, but now that word shiny in a way has so many other connotations in poetry and in literature and things like that. So do I think it's a problem? I think that it depends on what you're trying to do. If we're doing poetry and if we're talking together and trying to explain our experiences, I don't think it's necessarily a problem.
Right.
But I think that it's a problem when we're trying to cooperate and work together. When we're trying to have a goal that we're reaching and we can't even agree on what the words are, or how we should talk about this problem, then I think it becomes an issue.
I usually call it seeking truth, which again, truth can have so many different
Yeah.
baggage. So, see, I don't know the culture of that phrase. Now, does that come out of Hebrew? Or is that an English saying, peeing against the wind?
I just learned it about it. I just learned it. I grew up with it in Israel.
Okay.
Umavrik
In,
umashti neged
in
haruach.
Hebrew.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I mean, if you told that to me in English, I would comprehend that as someone who's doing something the wrong, or they're doing something that's going to lead them into a bad scenario. Like if you're going to pee against the wind, you're going to get piss all over you. So I interpret that as you're telling that to someone who's making a poor mistake or doing something
yeah.
foolishly.
But it's not like you're full of it, right? You wouldn't have
No, I
understand that you're
wouldn't.
full of it
No, I wouldn't.
because you're
Shiny,
shiny.
right?
Exactly.
I mean, that's like and it's funny that you mentioned the Hebrew to English thing. So I may have not been completely truthful. I've thought of some things that I may say to you today, and one of them, I saw a video on YouTube or TikTok, and it mentioned the first phrase or sentence of Genesis in English, which is "In the beginning, God created blah blah blah," but in
Yeah.
Hebrew it means something else. It means like God started at this point. God started creating. It didn't mean in the beginning. Like there's some, and I don't know if
Yeah.
like
Well,
there's a difference from going to Hebrew, whatever it actually is. I'm surely
it's
mistranslated,
no,
but
it's translated pretty well, right? In the beginning,
okay.
God created the heaven. Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. That's the first sentence. But in the beginning, yeah, it translates, but it doesn't understand like the word itself. Bereshit. It means that at the head of is how it starts, right? In Hebrew, it's at the head of. Bereshit. That's like the word. In Rosh means head. Reshit. It's like the first. It doesn't mean just the beginning. It has more
There's
context to it as
different baggage that comes
the
with it.
with the language exactly. Yeah.
Well, okay, so the atheist in me wants to say like that's probably like just that alone in that kind of translation of sounds and symbols that we make from culture to culture. There's just clearly so much ambiguity that goes along. Yet, modern day Christians will take this old Hebrew that has been translated into
Yeah, yeah,
Greek and
yeah.
Aramaic and then into English.
Yes.
And they think ontologically certain things that come along with their culture, not even considering the other baggage of where it
Yeah.
actually. And this is why I like going with the etymology of
Yeah.
a definition. Not always is that pragmatically useful, and we'll get into pragmatics as you and I are both. I'm a pragmatist. I'm an empiricist.
No, not
Yeah,
empiricist, but a pragmatist.
but a
Yeah.
pragmatist, right? That's
Yeah.
the whole underlying part of that joke. But
Yeah. For those who don't know, it's a joke from our Discord server. So a long time ago, there was someone in the server who would mock me, and say like, "Oh, I'm a pragmatist," mocking the way I would say it. Or, but I've never. I'm an empiricist, and it kind of caught on. But I'm not. I never said. I said like, as an empiricist, one would think X, Y, and Z, and he just took it, and that's the joke.
I mean, you are an empiricist, depending on the context or the conversation of what is being. I mean, surely you're looking at a camera right now, obtaining information,
Yes, yes.
listening with your empirical hearing, and responding.
But I think it's about truth. It's when we were talking about truth itself as in that domain.
Truth in terms of the words that we use to correspond with our ideas, our ideology? Are you
What
saying that it's more truthful? It's more true that I'm a pragmatist than it is true that I'm an empiricist. Is
the
that what
way
you're
I
saying?
understand truth is the lens of a pragmatist, not
I
the
see.
lens of an
Gotcha.
empiricist. Yeah.
And that's interesting because do you think that us pragmatists are doing what the theists are doing, where we're inserting God in spots where we don't know how to describe necessarily what's going on? So for truth, we just say, "Oh, it's pragmatic." I mean, what does that even mean that it's pragmatic and that it's useful? Isn't there some unknown with
Well,
this linguistic
instrumental. I think
ambiguity?
I think
Yeah.
instrumental is better than useful, as opposed to right. 'Cause it's not necessarily just outcome based. It's about giving us the tools to be able to explore and predict things. And I'm willing to change that whatever is necessary to make my instruments more useful to me, or more cohesive, or more pragmatic. Be able to make predictions with them, being able to understand the world in a way that gives me autonomy and control over it. We talk about autonomos, right? The ability to be, and I think that when we look at our models of what is true, the truth should make us more autonomous. It should give us dominion over ourselves and our environment. And if we can't do that, I'm not going to call it true. But in my eyes, some things can be more true than other things, depending on the application.
So the more that we can manipulate our environment, there's also the inwardness of usefulness, of course,
Yeah.
with poetry, as you mentioned earlier, religion, yada, yada, yada. I mean, that is an interesting point. I think it is difficult when I say Christianity is true for all of those instrumental reasons that you just listed.
Yeah.
But obviously, I don't think that Christianity is true the same way that it's true that I can pick up this lighter and instrumentally manipulate my environment, right? The dominion of nature, however you said it.
Well,
Um,
I think we have. I think that at least I try to make a distinction between like truth and observations and fact. It is true that I'm observing something, but I wouldn't say that this is this vape thing is true. I wouldn't say this glass is true. I would say I'm observing this glass. It's observable. Um, for me, truth is a bit more operational. It's a much bigger thing than like a piece of fact or a piece of observation. Um, when we say like what is the truth, like a question like, um, is it true that it's better for a person to exercise this way as opposed to that way? Like, what are we saying when we're talking about that? Um, we're constructing some sort of like model or utility, or an instrument to think about these issues themselves. Um, so for me, truth is more broad and much more transcendent than observation, or just like a fact, or like a brute uh, experience.
so instrument doesn't necessarily need to be with the observational part, does it? It could be like what about like a theory? I mean,
Yeah,
this theory was
perfect.
instrumental in getting this truth, or wherever that
For
lands
example,
on the.
is it true that speciation happened due to natural selection? Right, that'd be like a truth claim, and then we have to verify that truth claim. by looking at the model, at the prediction. So is it true that is evolution true? By that sense, I would say yes. Is it true that we have observed this, this, and that? Sure. But I wouldn't say that the observation itself is the truth,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Again, though, you can say it is true that I'm observing, as
Yeah,
you
you could say
mentioned
that. Yeah,
earlier.
you
Yeah.
could say that. But I
So,
wouldn't say that it is this is true,
so it's
right?
a very wide spectrum on how we use truth, and there's this
Hmm.
pragmatic notion to it. It will always need more explaining in detail, depending on what it is that we're trying to get to. Which I guess is the difference between the pragmatist and the Christians. I think where they insert God, we insert pragmatism and truth, but we have these, well, repeatable kind of observations, tangible, manipulate, like you can manipulate it and it's there. It's hard. It's hard. It slaps you in the face, right? Or there's some Nivik saying that I'm trying to think of where it slaps you in the, like, truth smacks you in the face
Truth
and
is like a
kicks you in the
pimple on the
butt.
back of your shoulder or something. I don't know,
Yeah.
whatever. But but I think the difference is that for us pragmatists, truth can change, right? Truth is malleable. It can change over time, and that's okay. As things, the truth doesn't have to be fixed. Doesn't have to be um, a thing that's immutable. If it's learned that there's a better truth out there, or something that's has more has can give us better instruments to give us more autonomy, makes us more autonomous, makes us understand the world better, then I would call that true. But for Christians, it's truth is fixed and immovable. I remember that time we talked about the Archimedean lever.
If you go into detail, I'll probably remember.
That like Descartes was trying to find the truth, the basis truth, and he believed like I think the story of Archimedes is that he wanted to find a fixed point and create a lever big enough where he could move the whole Earth itself. So
Okay.
the analogy that Descartes was trying to find a fixed point in logic, and by then deduce everything.
Right. He was trying to kind of take all of the furniture out and reduce it as far as it can go, and then slowly put the furniture back in from that point where he discovered the
The
0, 0
Yeah, yeah.
or Cartesian decimal point,
And
for
for him,
example.
that's I think I am right.
That was
Um,
right, which I think could be further reduced, by the way. But yes,
I
continue.
mean, I would say that for those who think that Descartes proved I think, therefore I am, or I think I am, that's actually why he's famous. It's because his whole project made a big circular argument called the Cartesian circle. So the point, basically, the point is, I don't think we'll ever. I take on, I guess, as a position of faith or an assumption that we're not going to have an Archimedean lever, like intellectually or cognitively. We're not going to have that fixed point of knowledge or fixed point of truth from which we could deduce all other truths. I think that's the fool. I think that's a fool's errand.
Unless you call it pragmatism and the fact that it can change and that there is no fixed point, that would be the,
The fixed point.
the oxymoronic.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, the
Right.
paradox that
Yeah.
you're contending with. And in that place, I'm like a Christian. But in the way that I approach the world, and I approach my relationships with people, and I approach what I would say what is, that can always change. And that's, I think, the difference
Not
between
only
like
from like the empirical rational point, is isness and being susceptible to change, but as we started off saying, by language, the change of understanding of the words that we use to describe what is going to change as well. Therefore, just a fixed point is it is a silly notion. It may be pragmatic to use that heuristic, let's
yes.
throw out there, but if we're going to try and be and seek truth and in Cartesian spirit reduce and be as very analytical and detailed as possible, we elaborate by saying these certain things, giving this metaphor, saying that it's not like this metaphor, it's always changing, it's in flux. Um, so
I feel like we're infected with Descartes' demon, right? Even Descartes couldn't convince us of his point. We're stuck. It's like the Cartesian skepticism is so deep inside of me that in order to make sense of the world, I just had to be okay with building foundations upon shaky sand.
Yes.
Right? Like that's basically the situation that I feel that I'm in. That now the project is how do I build foundations on loose sand, on shifting earth. Um,
I think that this is a problem that I see a lot where people will deconstruct ad infinitum, but they'll never build back up.
mhm.
They'll never have a starting point because there's something in their head saying, well, you can deconstruct this even further, which, yeah, you probably can, but let's insert the P word again here. There's a point where you have to practically get up out of bed and act as though there is some form of truth or isness or being that you're experiencing, and you're in the dominion of nature and you have to manipulate it one way or another. It's eventually going to kill us all, right? Nature is going to get a hold of us and get us.
Yeah,
But
I'll die eventually.
for the time being, we do our best to, and we do it whether we admit it or not. I think we have this pragmatic notion of how we go about the world,
But
and we
there's a,
go from there.
but there's a lot of disconnect with some people that I notice. Not to name any names, but you find them plenty on the Discord channel where I've said this before. Tilo less philosophy.
Telosless, yep, love
Yeah,
that word.
it's philosophy without a goal. It's just what is the point of this? What is why deconstruct this? Why have skepticism towards it? Why are we doing this to begin with? What's the point? If we're just having cognitive fun and playing games, sure. But much of the time it's not. It's to either support a position or convince a position or delegitimize other people's experiences or legitimize our own experiences. That's usually what I think a lot of people are doing when they're quote unquote discord online philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
100%. Philosophy without telos is less than half of the job of philosophy.
yeah,
I mean, the first half, it's a good skill to have, no doubt, but there's a point where, and that's why it's great to be tentative and just to be okay with not holding a position. I mean, if someone told me that pragmatism was false somehow, or they told me that this
sure,
lighter was false,
sure.
and I was convinced of it, I mean, sure. I mean, I have no uh, connection with this lighter or with pragmatism or anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
What it be is what it be.
so let's see.
But I'll still think that your lighter is true when I go ahead and light a candle. Or if I have to start my stove, I'm not going to be like, I'm not going to go reach for that lighter. Yeah, I'm going. If my stove's not turning on, I'm going to go get a lighter and try to light it up. Uh,
I hate when you're talking with someone and you're doing this, and they'll say fire doesn't exist or that lighter doesn't exist.
mhm. I was actually talking with someone about a gender, and they say, "Oh, well, gender doesn't exist." They go, "Well, people have genders. I don't know what to tell you. Just observably, tons of people around us have gender. They experience it. They say it's real. You and I do it. I don't
Okay.
know what you mean it doesn't exist."
So I don't know any of the priors that you had with that conversation, but let's see if I could take his position and based on what you said. So what you're observing actually is sex.
Oh yeah, yeah, I know what this, but I'm not talking about sex. I'm talking about the things that like feeling like you need to wear a dress, feeling like you want to put on makeup, walking a certain way, speaking a certain way, liking specific things, or being more into one type of food as another type of food. People take this on from their society around them. They add their own uniqueness to it and then put it back out into the world. And whatever that social construction that we do, that's gender. Um,
Okay, good. So do you observe it then? Do you observe gender or do you take note of what people are saying about how they feel about their gender?
well, I think gender exists insofar as I could try to measure it through like an
Right.
operational way
How do you
and
do that?
describe. Well, you take a bunch of people and you ask them what does it mean to be a man. take the attitudes of a community or of a society, and you look at all those different factors,
Okay.
and you kind of have a general idea that generally men, the gender of being a man looks like X, being a woman looks like Y. It doesn't mean that it's fixed. It doesn't mean that you can't have variations of it. You do. Everything in nature has variations. Even within sex, there's variations, right? Your dick is probably bigger than mine. Uh, right? Different heights, different body shapes, but we're still both males. There's
But that's
variation.
observation still. You
Yeah.
asking them if they feel like a
Mhm.
man or okay.
What is a man? What is it? Right? Like you can get answers like someone can say, "Oh, well, being a man means having XY chromosomes." So for them, in their construction of what it means to be a man, they defer to sex. And you can ask someone, "Well, being a man means being having honor and duty
Right.
and being kind and strong and protective." Well, that has nothing to do with your sex. Um, so scientists just have differentiated between those two things, sex and gender, as a way to make sense of the world. And it seems that when you make that distinction, all of a sudden, a lot of psychological issues, especially around the trans community, begin to make sense. You can start modeling them. You can put them, as we had in our conversation, orthogonally, right, on a graph and try to make predictions out of them. So
I still don't know what that word means, by the way.
it just means that, like, when you in data, it just means one as x-axis and the other one is the y-axis, which just simply means that, like, um, when something is an x
Okay.
variable, it will never have y, and if something is y, it will never have x. They both can't exist simultaneously in like that. In the places that they appear, like on the trend, as you have more of x, y appears more, or vice versa. So,
The inverse relationship.
or inverse, or positive linear relationship, no relationship, whatever it might
Because
be.
when it's on the graph, it still has both an x and a y coordinate, right?
Yeah, but by themselves they don't. They're completely without the other.
Okay.
No matter x1, a 0, 1, 0, 2, it's just all y-axis. That's orthogonal to the x in a sense.
Well, okay, and that makes sense as to why you feel as though it's necessary within the definition of dichotomy, right? I
Yeah.
mean, that's where it comes from. Wouldn't that still be wouldn't that be acceptable then if the dichotomy is this lighter and then everything that isn't this lighter?
Well, that'd be a negation. It wouldn't be a dichotomy. I wouldn't need another axis. I would just have I would just plot I would have an x-axis and be like the number of times the lighter shows up or doesn't show up. There's no need for a y-axis. Just I just
Hmm.
record the frequency of lighter or no lighter. I'm not actually like measuring anything against anything else.
Okay. Yeah, that one's confusing to me. So what would be then an example of a dichotomy other than I know you said independent and dependent. I mean,
I
what
mean,
would wait, what
heads.
did we just say earlier about X and Y? Did we use an example just then? Oh yeah, with gender, right?
Yeah,
Or sex, whichever one.
sure.
Is there a dichotomy of sex, female or
It's
well,
a
no,
female and male. It's not. It's bimodal,
because
right?
there's
There's
intersex.
variation. There's variations. You could have
Yeah.
there's intersex, and even within just the males, there is like if you just say just chromosomes, then it's very, very, very bimodal, right? If you reduce sex entirely to chromosomes, um, then I wouldn't call it sex. I would just call it chromosomes, and then it's extremely bimodal because you have very, very small percentage of the population that has like Klinefelters or what other chromosome. But then we can say, well, sex is more than that. It's chromosomes and their biological complements, right? Which is like height, facial hair, secondary sex characteristics, all these different things. And within that, you have a ton of variation, testosterone levels, height,
Right.
secondary sex characteristics, and things like that. The way I speak, I have like a lisp to the way I speak, which ends up making people think that I'm either more feminine or sometimes people think that I'm gay, just because of the way that I speak. But I'm not. It doesn't make a difference, right? But that would be a characteristic that I have that makes people think, from the way they understand gender, more feminine as opposed to masculine.
Well,
Um,
let's not do sex then. What would be an example of a dichotomy, either
The,
in nature or not, or
or
abstract,
in a
whatever.
heads versus tails.
Okay.
But I can't even graph heads versus tails, right? Like, how do I put
Why?
it? Because if it's again, it's just it's either heads or it's either tails. I'm never gonna have like a
There's
time.
no trend
There's no trend to associate between the two of them.
because it's not sometimes kind of heads and kind of tails.
Correct. It's
Okay.
either heads when you flip a coin, or it's not. If it lands in the middle, it's neither.
So
Right?
then you can't graph dichotomies.
No, they're completely orthogonal to one another. That was what I'm trying to say.
Okay. So the example of the trend of the X and the Y would not be a dichotomy
It wouldn't
then?
be no. It would just be a construction so we can model it. We'll put one on the x-axis, one on the y-axis, right? Something's either an independent variable or a dependent variable, so we can make sense of it. Because I think in the context of the discussion, it was like I said originally, I made something. I changed my mind on that. That there's no useful dichotomies to use to make predictions in empirical data, and that was wrong. Every time I want to put a dependent versus independent, I'm making a dichotomy between things and measuring them. But
What's an example of independent? Because I get those words, and so give me an example. This will tie it up if you give me an example of independent and
independent,
dependent,
taking medication would be the independent variable. Taking Advil.
and then not.
Dependent would be um, uh, presence of a headache. So I'm going to measure: did you take an Advil? Do you have a headache? So the independent variable, that which I can change, is did you take an Advil? Did you not take an Advil? The dependent is what is the effect, and I can measure
Yeah.
that.
Your headache depends on whether or not you took the Advil.
Yeah. But when I put things on an XY graph, right, things can never both be a dependent variable and be an independent variable. Like I can't, like the headache cannot be the independent variable when I do the research. It just can't. So
But
that
so would that be the dichotomy then? The
yeah, that would be the
Advil and
dichotomy.
the
No,
headache.
it would be the independent. Yeah, it would be the independent and the dependent would be the dichotomy. These two things are dichotomous to one another, like heads and tails. But the headache and not the headache. I could take an Advil and still have a headache.
Right.
Yeah.
So, okay. And I think we kind of hit on it when we were discussing it. I mean, these mathematical kind of abstractions are just that. They're an abstract. It's not like an observation that we see. We don't
Yeah.
see any orthogonal points. We don't see an x and a y axis. There's no perfect circles out in
Yeah.
nature, right? Even though it seems like there are perfect circles and it seems like
Mm-hmm.
we can, see a cylinder or whatever the case may be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a little bit. I mean, I guess I felt as though you were looking for such specific criteria as to if we were to see a circle out in nature, or if we were to see a dichotomy or an orthogonal set of things out in nature. We don't. I mean, things are always changing, right? Things are always going to be imperfect. And I mean, even a line is not going to be a real thing. A line is an abstraction.
Mm-hmm.
If you draw a line on a screen or something, I mean, you're going to notice that it's a little rough around the edges and whatnot.
Yeah, so I think that the reason why I'm so anal about this is because I get annoyed at false dichotomies a lot, especially when we like I have no issue with like mathematical dichotomies and constructions and theories and um it's either like for example a dichotomy would be something can't be a mental disorder and not negatively impact your life. You can't have a mental disorder and simultaneously that disorder not impacting your life in a
By
negative way.
definition, like
By
it's something
definition,
that it affects your daily activity.
yeah,
Right.
if you're functioning then you don't have this. Like it's not like you can't get diagnosed with it,
And you
for
think
example.
that is false, or you think that's
It's
what?
it the dichotomy itself is not false, but it's not a dichotomy that is observed. We never observed it. And the reason why I get frustrated is because a lot of times you would, I mean, it's like homosexuality used to be considered a disorder. Um and that's just not how I see people taking, like, projecting their own ideas about the world of what is and what isn't, what's exclusive and not exclusive, and just pushing it onto the world, pushing onto their observations, and in a way instantiating their biases as like, or their priors as,
When they use the word dichotomy, you see this.
yeah,
Okay.
as, or just when they speak as if it's a dichotomy,
Right.
right? It's
Like
either there's
the
the Christians, right?
Christians
The Christians,
and
right?
the atheists
It's,
or
yeah, it's either,
whatever.
what is it? It's either, well, no, I remember I had before I was an atheist, he was like, well, it's either one god or many gods. Well, that's a false dichotomy, right?
Yeah.
It's like one of these things. It's either a man or it's either a woman. It's either an occupier or an occupied, right? Like what's today in political language. It's either where it's either a colonizer or that which is being colonized. And I think that these uh, constructions might be very useful to understanding things, but we have to know their limitations and what those limitations look like.
So for the colonizer one, that would only be, would you say, that would be a true or a useful dichotomy if there is colonizing going on?
Yeah, I mean, it can
Because not
have.
always, sometimes they're at peace, right? But
Yeah, sometimes you're
right.
sometimes it's not even. I mean, can it be? Sometimes we might dare to say that it could be at an instance even good, right? That, whatever it might be, to go and occupy an area or whatever it might be. I don't know the answer. I could conceive of it.
But would
Um,
you, that would be a descriptive phrase to use? It is dichotomous. There are
yeah,
colonizers and there are colonized.
those, yeah, exactly. You can't side, but you could also, at the same time, I can think of a place that is colonized by another group who themselves were colonizers who colonized someone else, and the person is both a colonizer and a colonized simultaneously. That's possible. Um, so
Sure.
yeah, so
Yeah.
when we start, so I mean, not to get too, I don't know how political you want to get this, but I've a lot thinking about, what's happening in Israel and
Yeah,
the history.
I'd love to hear what you've been, because obviously you spend a good amount of your mental energy, no doubt, on what's been going on since October or
Yeah,
even
I mean,
before,
even
for sure.
beforehand, but
Right.
October definitely exacerbated a lot of that.
So I will, sure, I would love, and my lack of knowledge, both in current events and just the history of the Middle East. So, and what I don't know also, to some degree.
Yeah,
My based on what you've said
well,
to me in the past. So go on.
for me, a big part of it is that you see, like, the state of Israel and the way people think about the people there. And there's two narratives that I really hate. One of them is that Israel is just a country that showed up on its shores, all these people, and Arab Muslims were evil, and they fought for their survival. That's also not true. Um, and but the other side, the other narrative is that these are the extension of white Europeans. They're colonizers, just like Britain from South Africa or India, and these people were land grabbing and just colonized the area. Both of these, to me, dehumanize the populations, um, and it's that which really annoys me, because both things could be true, right? There were those that came from Europe during the late 1800s who wanted to build colonies and what was Palestine when the Ottomans ruled it, who felt like it was their time as a Jewish people to do what the rest of the English and the German and the Dutch and the French did, where they went out and they got this land and they made it their own. They created new nations inspired by the French Revolution, inspired by the American Revolution, who wanted their own community and their own society to self-determine themselves, right? We learn in American history that they ran from Europe to pursue religious freedoms. They felt like the Puritans and the Protestants. They ran away from that, and Jews in very much wanted that as well for themselves, and they went back to Israel, their historic homeland. And with that, there were people who did horrible things, right? Bought lands, pushed Arabs out of the way, created didn't weren't willing to live and work with Arabs. But then there were also Jews who were simply running away from persecution and went to try to work with Arab communities and move there without hate or malice. And what you end up seeing is a place that was formed not just because of some military backed European colonialist power, and not just people who are just refugees and victims. It's a combination of two things. And when we look at history and we try to just reduce it to these dichotomies, we miss the picture. And all of a sudden, we're left without the instruments to solve the problem. But we try to apply this lens of colonized, and we try to apply the lens of um, refugees, the Arabs, are the problem around them, and we just have perpetual conflict. We're not getting a solution because the model, the way we think about it, the constructions that we made don't fit like, they don't help us solve it. They don't give us the right instrument. It's not the right
Because
tool.
some people are considering the things that happened hundreds of years ago when they were seeking escaping this persecution, and and then there's the other side who is thinking about the fact that they were colonized and they just got ran up on essentially.
Yeah,
And so there's these different dichotomies that they use that are creating more problems than they're solving.
yeah.
Okay.
I think, and I think the primary way that the dichotomies work is by dehumanizing one another. That's what I see a lot. It's a real dehumanization of the other side. Um,
And is it dehumanizing? It's dehumanizing because it's not getting the full picture. It's taking a part of the whole. Or why is it dehumanizing, do you think?
because it over focuses on um, the historical narrative as opposed to like the people currently living there at the time. For example, I one of the things I really hate from like biblical law is like the sins of the father. Right? I think in the Old Testament, if I commit a sin, God will punish my children seven generations down, is what it says. No, fuck that. That's insane. At the same time, like when I remember I spoke with Cenk Uygur and I was like, when my family went to live in the West Bank, my parents they didn't want to go too far into the West Bank because they didn't agree with going and settling far off into Arab territory. But they also wanted to raise a family and they didn't know how to do that in Tel Aviv because they didn't really have enough money. So there was this area that they knew no one really lived on, and they were able to pay and buy it and build a home. And it's like 2 seconds outside the green line. And now they raised their family there. And before we moved in there, when I was a little kid, I was born there, but my older brother moved in from Tel Aviv. There were families already living there for a few generations. Israeli, you can't just now come up and say, oh, because you're during the War of '67 or during the War of '56 or whatever it might have been. We're talking 75 years later. Can you just uproot these families? How is a solution actually going to look like? Um, it's that looking at the narrative of, oh, they're just colonizers dehumanizes them. It takes away their humanity. In the same way of looking at Arabs, oh, they're just Arabs who don't have a state. Israelis will say this all the time. Palestine has never been a thing. It's not a real thing. No, yes, it is. It's a real thing. It's a state. They're not making it up. They're not just trying to kill Jews. They just want to live on their like. This is not dehumanizes the other. Takes away the human aspects that make solutions possible.
I really like, again, with my very little world political knowledge, uh, Germany, for example, I've been told has done their best to forgive their sins of their past generations of people, the Nazis.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, there is, usually I hear it in a joking manner where they're joking about the Nazis. I mean, we've heard a bunch of jokes onto you, right, of a dehumanizing kind. Uh, but I mean, can you imagine if the whole world kind of did this dehumanization that you're talking about? The people in Germany would still be getting hate, and there'd probably be hate going right back out. And the problem,
You know, I don't think it's my mom, but some people in the community have heard, "Oh, I will never buy a Mercedes. I'll never buy a BMW." That's a Nazi card. What a ridiculous thing to say.
Right.
No one who's working there really is was a Nazi. These people are just, the country fucked up. Let's just put it straight. But I think we have to also we have to remember to forget. It's a line I think one of the prime ministers of Israel said. I think it was Begin. I don't remember exactly who it was, but it was remembering to forget or learning to forget is a really, or commemorating to forget is a really, something along those lines. And I think the main
It
idea
was probably in
was,
Hebrew in one way, and now it's different in English in the
I
other
don't know,
way.
I don't remember, but the idea is that in order to move forward, we have to learn to forget. We just have to learn to forget what happened 50 years ago, what happened 100 years ago. Like if Jews are never going to forget what happened in the Holocaust, um, we're never going to be able to be in a position where we can even live in a multicultural society. That's just not going to happen, right? But at the same time, the reason why it's like remembering to forget is because the idea is that we're not going to not remember. We're going to live with those echoes for a very long time. My grandmother is still alive. She survived the Holocaust, right? But we have to remember to forget it, to put it on the side. It's going to be living with us no matter what, but we have to put it back so we can move forward. Not eliminate it, but remember to, when we talk about these issues, we have to remember to forget it at that moment. I think that's kind of like the position that he was trying to take.
As long as you don't forget so much that you end up making the same mistake
Yeah,
because you've forgotten how it got you there.
yeah.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
it's like, I don't know if you've ever gotten like into arguments with friends or been mad at someone. You kind of have to, like, okay, just put that behind you when I go and meet them and move forward. You don't forget that that happened, and you're always cautious. But in your interaction, you have to put it behind you to move forward in a way.
I mean, yeah, I would almost just want to be pedantic and say forgive is better.
Well, but who are we forgiving? Are the Jews forgiving the
Yeah,
people who murdered
true. I
them?
mean,
Are the Palestinians supposed to forgive the bands of like crazy Jews who like pushed them out of their villages? Or are the Israelis supposed to forgive um, those who were, their family members were killed during the '76 war, the '67 war? No, no, you don't. I don't expect people to forgive that, but I do expect them to forget in a small period of time,
yeah.
that when you're sitting there in front of them, that they're a human being too, and you got to put it on the side for just 1 second and try to move forward and see if that's possible.
I mean, my ultimate word is compromise. That's my favorite word.
Yeah.
Um, which I mean, surely these two parties have to come to some, if that's a true dichotomy, right? I mean,
Even
the
then, it's not a
battle,
true dichotomy,
right? Exactly. So,
because even
and
within Israel you have divisions, and within the Palestinian people you have divisions,
it's
and it's not like,
mixed,
and
it's
they
overlapping.
have their own interest within each other,
Yeah.
and right, this is where the dichotomies start to fall apart. They're simple heuristics if you're explaining it to a
Yeah.
child, but
In terms of the useful binary, anyone who is in conflict with each other need to come to a compromise, and if we can include as many people as possible, since there are there's differing motives and whatnot, then they should be a
mhm,
part of that compromise as well.
yeah.
But just obviously speaking on these, so what do you think about the two-state solution? I mean, that almost uh, at least a binary, right? We could say binary instead of dichotomy. There's
Okay.
this binary of a compromise between these two states.
Um,
Is that the end goal? Do you accept that usage of binary? I mean, however you want to tackle that question.
I support the beginning of two states, and ideally, I would like to see
One,
A
okay.
united area. Whether you want to call it Israel Palestine, I don't really care the name; it's irrelevant to me. I would want to see movement between borders. I would want to see um, a bunch of that's the ideal. But I think that in the beginning, there needs to be the ability for Palestinians to self-determine themselves and have a state and have autonomy and have economies and be able to make like military self-police themselves in a way that doesn't involve Israeli crackdowns.
Autonomos can be applied to
Yeah,
states as well as
exactly.
individuals. Yeah.
And I also recognize Israel's hesitance in just letting that state just develop. Um, what is that state going to wage war on its citizens? Is that state going to try to aim for this state's elimination? Um, but my overall goal is I think it needs to start with the two state. I would ideally like to see within my lifetime a federation where there's a Palestinian state and an Israeli state, and they both share some sort of like supranational government. In this, imagine like I don't know, Florida and Georgia had like one unitary government between both states that like deals with trade or something. I don't know. Um,
I wouldn't give a shit, and I don't know what implications that would create. Um, I mean, it is. It would. Let me ask this: in terms of this end goal of a unified state, which would be ideal from your perspective, how much does religion play a part in either creating or denying this end goal,
I think
or does it not play a huge role as some
religion
people may
obviously
think?
plays a massive role, and I think the
Okay.
reason why it does is because religion is totalizing. When you look at a religious person's life, religion is everything. They view their entire life through the lens of that religion. What they do when they wake up in the morning, what they do when they pick out a spouse, how they raise their kids, what they eat, how they eat it. Who are they? Who is the enemy? What is the state? All of these religion is becomes a primary lens of who you are. So of course the religious bodies are a serious predicament, especially religious notion of historical land rights. That is a very corrosive thing that has been pervasive throughout this conflict that people have used to justify like land conquest, whether it was Muslims in the 6th century, in the 12th century, or Jews in our current era who decide that this land is there. For example, radical settlers who move into the West Bank, who Israel has to go ahead and demolish their houses, and then the religious communities in Israel are mad that Israel is doing that and try to conflicts, whatever it is. Religion, of course, plays a huge role in that, and it's a problem. It's a serious problem. A lack of pluralism when it comes to truth. Again, we're back to that the lack of pluralism around truth.
I was going to say, is there some compromise that they would be able to come to?
The compromise would have to be, I think, that you have a right to practice your religion, I have a right to practice my religion, and we have to live amongst one another. That's the
And I
compromise.
can see that happening. I mean, I mean, I don't see that creating such an issue where you can't have a unified state. I I don't know what
But the
it's.
state would have to be secular, and this is why like I have to say like you have to is Jews have to remember to forget in a sense because that's who I'm speaking with. I don't know the internal Muslim perspective very well, um, but within Jews it's always like, oh well, are we actually going to are we going to actually allow ourselves to become a minority in our state again? Look what happened last time we were a minority in Germany. Look what happened when we were a minority in France. Look what happened when my grandfather was a were minorities in Iran and Algeria and the Yemen. Look what happened when we were minorities in Palestine. We're always being attacked. Our history has been this way. People are still alive today who have experienced it till today. They're just living and breathing and working and having kids and grandchildren who escaped Algeria and Tunisia and the Yemen and Morocco and Germany and Poland. My grandmother being one of them. Do I just tell her to like how is she supposed to contend? Is she actually going to vote to policy that would make her a minority in her own country again? I don't know the answer to that.
I mean, so I almost want to just assume that you would see an issue if it would become a unified state, that if Israel were the minority in this unified state, they would end up being exploited. Or,
That's the fear. That's
yeah,
the fear. But
unless there's a secular government running
unless
it,
there's a secular government running it.
wouldn't they still be a minority, even if there
It
was,
wouldn't it wouldn't matter so long as the secular government truly sees them as allowed to practice their
and there
rights
weren't
and
like coup d'etats of Israelites or Arabs within the
correct.
police or government, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But on the other hand, when you are the majority, like Jews are the majority in Israel right now, you end up having a government, just like in any majority government, that the majority caters to itself. Right? That's a democracy's work. The majority ends up ruling, and you end up having a hard time, um, not just by law, because there's within Israel proper, and for those you might not know the difference, within the recognized borders of like 48 or 67 or something, as opposed to all the way out to the West Bank. Within Israel proper,
What is
Palestinian
Israel proper again? Is it a,
Israel controls the West Bank, militarily controls it occupies the West Bank.
okay?
And they don't occupy Gaza; they have a blockade around Gaza. So Israel proper would be any part of Israel that isn't the occupied West Bank.
Okay.
Within Israel proper, Palestinians legally share the same rights, right? They can vote, they can run for they there's they're in the parliament, they're the equivalent of like assemblyman people, they're elected representatives, they're doctors, nurses, all that stuff. They have the same rights. They can't just go to prison, they can practice their religion, you can't tell them to do anything.
Right.
But outside in the occupied territories, they don't have those same rights as Jews who live in the West Bank. Jews who live in the West Bank can vote in Israeli elections. Palestinians who live in the West Bank cannot. Right? Um,
So it's kind of like a weird mesh mediating in West Bank that have conflicting government policies on the population of West Bank.
yeah, because the Palestinians in the West Bank have their own government, but in between them live little communities of Israeli Jews who are under the protection of the Israeli government. The Palestinians in Israel proper don't vote in the Palestinian elections in the West Bank. They just vote in Israel's
Are they like
politics.
split up pretty nicely, or are they kind of like meshed in between where
It's meshed
the
in between.
Israel government has to run past Arab territories to help
No, they don't have to.
Israel's and
They don't have to run past. But they'll be like let's say this is one community. You'll have like a road going around it to an Israeli community, and that community has a road going around to another Palestinian community. Like it's like webs. Think of like roads and anything like that. Or I don't know. I'm thinking of like when you drop ink onto a piece of paper and you like tilt the paper, you have like lines cascading.
hmm
So the ink would be like the settlers moving in, and the white would be the Palestinians. So it's yeah, kind of how it would be. And they have some areas have checkpoints where if you want to move from one community to another, but you don't want to do the whole loop around the Palestinian territory, you'll have to go through an Israeli checkpoint to another Israeli checkpoint. You go stuff like that, and
And what
that's kind of like the occupation.
what's like the general vibe of that area right now? Is it kind of on high alert?
Right
Is
now,
it
it's on high alert. Right now, there's conflicts, there's attacks, there have been terrorist attacks or Palestinian attacks, and there have been settlers attacks on Palestinians.
so just
You know,
don't go outside for a walk needlessly.
you could go outside for a walk. It's not to the point where you're not physically safe like that.
Yeah.
It's not like Gaza. You can't just Gaza right now is being destroyed, but it's a war zone. It's not a
Yeah.
war zone, but you should be more vigilant, right?
Yeah, have they
Don't hang around with a yarmulke at night by whatever it is, or don't be a Palestinian hanging around by this settlement at night during this time or this time. So like
what's
young radical people.
what's the status on the underground tunnels in Gaza? Have they been mostly
No,
what
most of it's miles and it's so far what has been found from what I've read
and
is
the
within
hostages?
hostages. I think they found three bodies of hostages who were killed. He has found their bodies because they even hold the Hamas and the Palestinian Jihad still hold on to bodies like as bargaining chips because Jews really want to bury their dead. Anyone wants to bury their family members, so they hold on to them as bargains. So they found three bodies of hostages. Israel is invading Rafah at the moment and telling Palestinians to evacuate. Um, and there are tons of tunnels. It's the equivalent of like the London metro system at this point of tunnels, miles of tunnels they have found so far.
Right.
So, and there's more that they're finding every day.
And that's kind of like high on the priority list, I'd imagine, of dealing with things
Yeah.
as so who are the main governments that are kind of running that area?
Gaza, it's Hamas is the main government, the main governing body is the one who's running the Gaza Strip. along with another faction called Palestinian Jihad. But I think it's just a military faction. I'm not too sure.
All right. Well, it's an hour. I'm gonna try and keep these interviews at exactly an hour. I
Damn.
think. I
Okay.
think. I think we did a pretty good job. Um, I figured that it would lead into some of the things that it did. Um,
We can talk more. I don't mind if you have another question or more things to talk about. Um,
uh, Thanks, Bear. I just saw your message. If you're still with us, he said, "Hello, stumbled upon your conversation. Enjoy listening. I am a proponent of rehumanizing our narratives and perspectives." Absolutely,
Amen. Agree.
yeah,
100%.
definitely. But I mean,
100%.
I have three other interviews that I also want to keep at an hour, so I kind of want to keep my
I hear
stamina
you. I hear
for the
you.
next 72 hours.
I
I
hear you. I hear you. I hear you. I hear you.
mean, to be continued. I mean, obviously we'll end up discussing more about.
Yeah.
I mean, we covered a lot: linguistics, pragmatism, religion, politics, since that's my favorite thing to talk about. Um,
Politics for me is applied philosophy. Really is like it's like how do we take philosophy and apply it socially and like try to make ways for us to work together.
it should be that way.
Yeah.
Descriptively, I almost want to use the false dichotomy that it's either politics or philosophy. That's something that I've been using a lot. Obviously, they overlap, but it's almost like the predator prey thing that ChatGPT gave us as an example of a dichotomy. It seems like when you're a predator, you're a politician, and when in this case, this is why it's not a good dichotomy. Obviously, the philosopher isn't the prey, but
I know
the
what you mean.
the philosopher would be the symbiotic being
Yeah.
where it practices symbiosis, right?
I
So
think I think the biggest difference is philosophers are patient, politicians are not.
that's a good one.
Right?
Yeah,
Philosopher will sit there and talk with you, and politicians like, no, 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 we got to get this done tomorrow. Now let's go. How do I get this done? What are the means that I can do to get this done? What are the and they just find to try to whatever it is to get it done too.
another one, self interest would be on the politics side, and group interest would be on the philosophy side, in my opinion.
Unless
Obviously,
unless you talk to some people like
unless you're an
like
egoist or a nihilist
or
or
a
something,
nihilist or
right?
an objectivist. I think objectivists are also like that.
Sure. And it's when someone tells me sophistry is a form of philosophy, it's like, yeah, you're right, but I wouldn't consider you a philosopher if I'm calling you a sophist. I don't think you're a philosopher. Right? That's
Well, let's put
my
it this way: if you're a sophist, I'm going to call you a philosopher in the most derogatory, loose way.
yeah. I
Let's put
mean,
it that way.
I almost consider philosophy as religion and wouldn't want to be blasphemous to call a sophist a philosopher, but um,
And that can take us into a whole debate culture thing because I think debate
oh
culture
my god,
is the philosophy of sophistry.
is the anti-philosophy
Yeah.
sophist again, nihilism, another term that has so many different definitions and baggages. Sometimes nihilism is good, I think, to be applied, depending on what it is necessarily.
I'm a nihilist. I'm a
Depend
nihilist in the sense that I don't think meaning exists in some sort of observable, empirical
objective
way. Yeah.
as noumena somewhere out there, right?
But I believe
Yeah.
that we can make it. We can. I do not. I don't have. I am myself not filled with nihilist, whatever you'd call it, whatever the object of nihilism is. I have none of that. I have tons of meaning in my life,
I
and I like to
will
give it to other people.
I will take actually maybe a few minutes because now that I think about it, as I said, I didn't come with any pre-planned questions, but I did want to ask you about morality if it were to
Okay.
come up. So this usually would blossom into probably an hour. It might not even be worth spending just a brief second talking about it and not giving it its credit its due. And I don't even know how to phrase the question. Is the issue? I mean, you call yourself a nihilist for the reason that you don't think it exists out there. You think that we create it. Do you think that it's purely that, or is there, like in science, there's the peer review? Do you think that there's an additional other at least party that has to be connected with you in order to create morality? To me seems to only mean anything when there's at least two or more
Yeah,
parties.
I agree. I don't.
Okay.
I don't. I think morality is a human construction, not an individual one. What is right and what is wrong, what is should be done or shouldn't be done, is a human construction. And again, there's a saying in Hebrew. It's called "al tam v'reach and malit v'keach," which just means on sight and sound, there's nothing to argue about. And I always understood it as like, well, I can't really argue with someone about should. Like I can tell you why like I think that this should be this way, why this is better. But if you truly believe that things should be that way, like what am I going to argue with you about? Um, so I think morality is when we agree on the should, and then we can find some sort of way of getting there. Um,
You have to come to a compromise,
you
and you
have
have
to,
to agree. Yeah,
yeah, and
couldn't
then yeah,
couldn't have said it better.
yeah.
So okay, good. Um, Again, that could just branch into so many different avenues, but
Next time,
I have
next
no
time,
next
next
time.
time, yeah,
Sure.
next
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. So you're going to be, if we have it next time, it'll be after June 1st. I imagine that you're going to that show, that event.
I am going to the event on June 1st.
Okay.
I think I might speak on stage a little bit as well with
Oh,
Travis,
hell yeah.
so that should be fun.
Dude, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Like after on camera on the
Before,
couch with,
I think before
okay.
as well. I think we're gonna do like a what do we expect to see, or what do we hope the conversation as like people are shuffling in, and then like stop a little bit earlier, give it like 10 minutes repose, and have them talk on the couch, and then after they're done, we'll do like a small little after show.
They do the
Um,
questioning with the microphones,
yeah,
I
they do. No,
imagine.
yeah. After all the Q and
Yeah.
A, I don't know if it's gonna be at the because after the show you can go and like get a book signed or a poster signed by the speakers. I don't know if it's going to be over there, and we're going to be talking to people. I haven't, but something like that. So after, but I'll be free to talk on the weekends in general,
Okay.
right?
All right. Yep. We'll play it accordingly and
Yeah.
tentatively. So, all right. Great talk. I appreciate it. I'm going to wrap it up here.
Always parents, amazing
Uh,
conversations.
Dandan Prager University. I mean, if you search up Dandan Prager, you'll find it. Yeah, Prager University is
No,
that one
n-
thing that one group that you hate or whatever.
Dennis Prager. I'm tangentially related to him, so and I don't
Well,
like what he has to say. So
is he Jewish?
yes.
Of course, you're tangentially
No,
related
no,
to him.
no. I think that his family, from what I saw, moved to America before before the Holocaust, like in the late 1800s.
Oh, okay.
And then my family ended up running from Europe to Israel, but we're related down there, like great uncle Max or something. No, I looked it up. I think like
Anyway, if you
yeah,
search up Dandan Prager on
you'll find
YouTube,
my yeah, you'll
Google,
find
you'll find
myself.
him. So,
Yeah, pretty much.
alrighty. Appreciate you.